This is what I'd like to cover this afternoon. I'll say a little bit about the problem with strategy. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the kind of theoretical stuff here, because I guess that's not why we're all here. But it is important in making the case for what we could do instead. There are big problems with strategy. I'm running a panel session at the International Strategic Management Society conference in Washington in mid-October, which has basically got that title. The simple fact is that the strategy tools we teach in business schools are not used. But yet we spend, 20 course days teaching the stuff for people to go away and not use. So I'll explain why I think that problem exists, and then we'll get straight into an exercise to give a sense of what could be different about strategy. And it's a simple exercise about launching a consumer brand. Now, one of the things about what we'll cover this afternoon is that the frameworks seem to be able to be moved from situation to situation. So although that's about launching a consumer brand, I actually owe this insight to one of my students about 5 years ago, who said, actually, this framework works just as well in terms of understanding and managing how you get organizations to change. Oh, how do you make that connection? Well, it turns out you can. There is a connection there. There's a very strong connection, it turns out. And a further extension of it is about, there are parallels here about managing an asset base. If you're running a power company, for example, you've got transformers, switches, cabling, all that kind of stuff. And this stuff wears out. So if you run a power distribution company, your strategy is dominated by your ability to do that. You've got no power over pricing. You've got no power over marketing. There is no marketing you can do because the market's saturated, basically. There's very little you can do. Your largest control lever over your long-term performance is how well you manage your asset base. Right? So an unusual situation, but it's a quirk of that particular industry. So out of that, I hope I'll be able to give an idea of what a solution to the strategy problem might start to look like. Getting really practical, just to bring this really to life, I'll give you a short case example of a piece of work we did for a company that was wanting to replace a medical device that was coming to the end of its patent life. They needed to replace that. And then we'll end up with another hands-on exercise, which makes some points about how strategy has to change over differing industry conditions, and then leave you with some thoughts on next steps. Okay, here's a case, a well-known case. This is the performance of Starbucks up to 2008, and you can see that it's a pretty astonishing track record, right? They've grown to over 15,000 stores worldwide. At their peak, opening 2,000 stores a year. That's 40 stores a week. Can you imagine that? Opening 40 stores a week somewhere in the world. 40 new stores open. And why do that? Well, because there's a huge opportunity and nobody else is as good at taking it. So why not? Makes nothing wrong with that. And this is what's happened to the company's revenue. And you can see there's just a hint there that growth in the latest year is not quite as good as it has been. So the revenue the revenue growth is just tailing off a little bit. But this is the operating profit. And you can see that that relatively small growth in revenue translates into a huge drop in operating profit. Operating margin, that's how much profit are you left with for every dollar you take from the consumer, all right? So you pay $1 for your coffee. Back in 2002, they made 9.5 cents profit. They increased that to 12 cents profit, and then it fell back to 11.5 cents profit. That turns out to be really important, really, really important, how that number changed. Now you'll see that the reported profits fell to about 500 million from just over $1 billion. 300 of that was exceptional items to do with closing stores and restructuring the overhead of the business, the administration of the business, which again turns out to be an important issue. Anyone got any kind of observations or questions about this?
Is that related with the big economic downturn picture, or is it purely industrial?
It's a bit of both. It's a bit of both. Why were they so successful? Well, in the fast food industry, typically, staff don't like working there. Basically, they don't like it. So satisfaction ratings of 50 to 60% are quite normal. Staff turnover of 300% a year is normal. That means the average staff person stays with you for 4 months. In fact, McDonald's and Burger King basically built their business model originally on the assumption that is as long as people will stay with you for, because there'll be students and there'll be casual workers, and they designed a system which could cope with very fast staff turnover. Starbucks basically looked at that and said, well, there's got to be a better way here. And they put huge effort into staff satisfaction and retention. How do we make this a place people want to work and want to stay? And why is that important? Because if they stay, they get to know the customers, they get to know how things work, they get to know each other, we build a strong culture, and this will all come out in increased sales and ability to command higher prices. Every person who works in Starbucks, and I think they're all owned stores, every person has a small number of shares in the company. But they spend more on employee training and development than on marketing, which is pretty impressive. That's a big number. The result of all that was staff satisfaction of over 80%, and they were rated the second best place to work amongst large US corporations in 2005. That's, when you're comparing them against people like Google and Amazon and, all the fantastic companies you could work for, to come second on that ranking is pretty good. Yeah. And turnover rates way below industry average at 70 to 80% a year. So people on average stay for 15 to 18 months. Yeah. So pretty good. Now, what does that do for you? Well, the company has 170,000 employees. 80% turnover means you've got to hire and train 130,000 a year. If you had 200% turnover, you would have to hire and train 340,000 people a year. 1/3 people you'd have to hire and train every year. So, this is quite tough. And you've got to get staff to open new stores. So, to answer your question about what happened here, that's where their revenues came from. If you had less regular customers, because you had less skilled and staff and people who didn't know the customers so well, if you had less regular customers, then your revenues would be way below the 10.4 billion. But it would be even worse, because if that were all the revenue you would be getting from those stores, you wouldn't have opened most of those stores in the first place, because they couldn't have been profitable. Yeah? So this is a pretty magic machine here. Now, why has it gone wrong? Well, revenues were up 10% in that latest year, but weakness in comparable store sales was driven by the US segment. Comparable stores are stores that you run this year that you also ran last year. Okay, that's what a comparable store is. And those sales were down 5%. Now, why were they down 5%? We'll come back to in a moment. In addition, margin fell from that 11.2 to 4.9%. So their operating profits halved per coffee that you sell. And they closed stores. That number is now out of date. They've now closed over 1,000 stores. Their underlying operating margin was 8%. So it had fallen from 11.5 to 8. They actually improved their overhead costs. So they actually reduced the cost of the center that looks after everything. If you'd like to have a little look at what's behind some of this, there's a great website. I think it's called Starbucks Gossip. It's just a constant stream of comment and counter comment from customers and from staff about Starbucks. You get all kinds of stuff. But what is absolutely clear is that customers are not happy and staff are not happy now. Very not happy. So I'll just leave you with that situation in mind, because I'm going to ask you later to have a think about why this might have come about. And we'll go back to that picture, because that picture is the story of a mistake, a strategic management mistake. And the question is, how do our strategy tools help us not make this mistake? Right? And we'll leave the answer to that question till the end. It's not the only mistake that's being made recently. You see these things all over the place all the time. Every day in the newspaper there'll be some story or other that talks about a problem of mismanaging strategy over time. This is the rate at which new ships are being built. So back here, this was after the Second World War, we were building 20 million tons of new ships, and then it kind of collapsed. And then here we were building nearly 40 million tons of new ships. And now, the latest order book, the pale blue, if those ships get built, then that will have been a rate of 120 million tons of shipping in 1 year. Okay? Where is that shipping now? Where are those vessels? They're sitting on the ocean outside Shanghai Harbour waiting for something to do, and outside every other major harbour in the world. In fact, the Chinese government is so cross about it, they've told them to go away. They don't want their seas littered up with ships. So this is a mistake. There was never, ever going to be demand, sustained demand for that volume of shipping. Okay, there could have been a scrappage of old tonnage, but that's a hell of a big jump, isn't it? Right? It's a hell of a big jump, and it could never have made sense. Now, why did it happen? Well, in 2003, if you had had a ship at that point in time, how much could you have got for it? How much could you have rented it for? You could have rented it for $15,000 a day. By the time we got to here, you could have rented it for $300,000 a day. So if the price you can get for renting the ship goes up 20 times, what are you going to do? Build more ships. And who is going to build more ships? Everybody is going to build more ships. Okay? So everybody's going to build more ships. And at some point, all those ships actually get built. And what happens to that number then? It goes back to 15, or even less. It goes back to 15. So in the middle of last year, one of these ships, which cost $18 million, was sold less than 6 months later for $7 million. Yeah. Now, this is not just a financial waste. This is not exactly good news for the environment. It takes a few tons of carbon to make a ship. It takes an awful lot of tons of carbon to drive them around the world's oceans as well. So, this is not good news. But here's the question. Who ordered that ship? That one, up there. Who ordered that one? What on earth were they thinking? Someone must have made that decision to place that order. What were they thinking? That can't have made any sense. And again, what strategy tools are we going to use to help avoid making that mistake? Or even more usefully, how are we going to use which strategy tools to tell us how we can exploit this situation? Because this has happened before. It's happened in this industry. It's happened in petrochemicals where I started. I had a discussion 2 weeks ago with Lloyd's of London. The insurance market, it's a club market in which there are about 80 insurance brokers who insure things like this. That's what they do. And the insurance industry has got horrible cycles like this. Their profitability can go up to 25% and back to minus 20% within 6 months. So they've got the same kind of problem. And what strategy tool will you use to solve that problem? I don't know. I don't know of one. Apart from the one we're going to talk about this afternoon anyway. Right. So that, does that give you a kind of appetite for why we should want to know this? Yeah? Things change over time, and strategy is about running things over time, managing things over time, making good management decisions that will give you good results over extended periods of time. It's not about fixing short-term ratios.
Sorry, I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah.
When you say what strategy tools would you use to solve that problem? What is the definition of that problem?
Well, that problem is,
peaks down the curve.
yeah, gross over-ordering. If you looked at the, well, and these swings in price, this, you know, if you were trying to look at the profitability of this industry, you'd say, well, you know, what are the barriers to entry here? Well, the barriers to entry are not actually very great. You know, I can go and raise money and I can order ships. You know, if I haven't got much reputation in the marketplace, that might be quite difficult. But what explains prices varying by a factor of 20? It's not, you know, and what am I going to do about it? Even if I know that that's true, what am I going to do about it to stop this thing happening, or if it is going to happen, exploiting it and make use of it? So it's pretty tough, this. A further question, of course, is if you're in the public services, your primary interest is not in profitability anyway. You're probably in delivering services, delivering quantity and quality of services for a certain price, preferably improving the price at which you're delivering that service or increasing the service for the same price. It's not about profitability. So you know, it's a different kind of question. So here's the contrast. If I put it in extremely simple terms, the strategy tools we started with and that were all the rage when I started teaching strategy, this is the question they're trying to answer. They're trying to explain why is the distribution of profitability in an industry like it is. You know, why is the airline industry on average unprofitable over long periods of time? And why is pharmaceutical industry very highly profitable over long periods of time? And once I've answered that question, the second question is, how do I get to be here rather than there? That's, in essence, the question that the strategy field tries to answer. So in Starbucks terms, how can Starbucks achieve margins of 11 or 9.5% when everybody else in the same industry is only achieving 5, 7, 8? Yeah? And keep them up at 8% even when times get tough, which they have done. You know, they've kept their profitability up to 8%. So that's the question. That's the static profitability maximizing question that you're asking. But that isn't the question that investors are interested in. That's the question they're interested in. They want to know, why are profits following the path they are, or strictly speaking, cash flows? Why are profits or cash flows following the path they are? And how are we going to do this rather than that? Yeah? So in Starbucks terms, that is, how can Starbucks deliver sustained profit growth of 15% a year and not fall back in tough times? It's a different question. This one has a little bit to do with that one, because if you are able to be a bit more profitable than other people, then you might be able to deliver stronger growth. That's possible, but it's not a very strong relationship, because one of the things you may need to do to drive growth is spend money. And if you're spending money, you're going to be less profitable rather than more so. Now, where that's led us to is some tools that do this kind of thing. This is one of the latest tools. It comes from the Blue Ocean strategy ideas from Kim and Moborn at INSEAD, which is good. It's a perfectly good tool and gives you perfectly decent answers. And what this is doing is it's looking at the various things that might be important to you if you're trying to make a journey, a medium to long distance journey. What's important to you? Is it important that it be cheap, that you get meals, that you get lounges to hang around in, that you can connect with other services, that the people who serve you are friendly, that it's quick, and so on. So if you take an average airline, that's an average airline, which is relatively expensive, and the meals are there, but they're not very good. You get lounges, you can have business class if you want it, you get plenty of connections. You can fly from London to Frankfurt 5 times a day rather than once, so it's not infrequent. And what does a company like Southwest look like, or Ryanair? Well, very low price, no meals, no lounges, none of this, no connectivity, fantastically friendly service, very fast, and very frequent departures. So it basically says that's why Southwest beats American or Delta. Right? Now, that is true and it's useful. Yeah? It's true and it's useful. But it hasn't changed in 30 years. You could have drawn that picture in 1979. It would be no different. Just the same for Ryanair. It would be the same the day Ryanair started as it is today. So the question is, and by the way, lots of other companies have done the same. Lots of them. Southwest is, one of, 20, 30 plus low-fare airlines started in the US. Must be 20 plus low-fare operators in Europe. Okay, so it's true and useful, but it hasn't changed, and loads of other people have copied it. So how come this company is successful, and Ryanair is successful, and EasyJet is successful, but all the others aren't? Because they're all following the same recipe. They're doing the same thing. So this cannot explain why the winners have won. This is Michael Porter's activity system version of the same thing. It's got the same items on it pretty much, just kind of organized in a slightly different way. But the same thing is true. It's true and useful, but it hasn't changed in 30 years. It's been replicated by lots and lots of competitors. And you could do the same with the value chain tool, or almost any other tool in the strategy field. You just don't get any different answer. So the question that this leaves is, what has management been doing for the last 30 years? They can't have been doing nothing in the way of strategic management of their business. They must have been doing something. There's just a little footnote here. The CEO of Southwest was given the 2003 Lifetime Achievement Award by the International Strategic Management Society, and I can remember his acceptance speech. He said, "Thank you very much for this award, but I don't actually know what strategy is. So kind of thank you, but I'm not sure what's going on here." So we need something. This is just by way of saying we really, really need something better. The tools we have are not fit for purpose. They're not fit for purpose. And that's what the event at Washington is going to be about. We're going to try and confront the business schools and say, look, you guys have been working on strategy for 50 years. No one uses your tools because they don't do anything useful. And you know that, and they know that. So why do we keep up this pretense that this is a useful thing we're spending our time doing, right? Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that making the positioning decision, making the choice of where and how to compete is unimportant. It is important. But there's a lot more to strategy than that. There's an awful lot more to it than that. And it's not just these airlines that this is true of. If you did this analysis of Amazon.com, just the same. Their essential value proposition is exactly the same today as when they started. Same with eBay. Same with Cisco. Same with Unisys. Really successful companies do not keep changing their mind. They focus and they find a system that works and then they relentlessly drive it forward. And that's the piece that we're missing. We have a really, really big need to understand about the management of strategy, not the positioning. If you try to say to management, here's what you should do, because you will be more profitable than anyone else if you do that, you could very seriously risk losing out to competitors who are less profitable than you but grow cash flows much faster. I can still remember a piece of research that was published. I think it was in Strategic Management Journal. They were trying to identify whether it was better to expand internationally if you were operating in a certain industry. And they did a large sample survey of companies in the industry all over the world, and they proved conclusively that those that expanded internationally were consistently less profitable than those that stayed in their home market. And I mentioned this to one of the CEOs I knew working for a company actually in the industry, and he said, well, that's obvious. If I'm going to expand internationally, I've got to set up operations in the new country, I've got to take on marketing and sales people, I've got to spend on advertising to develop my market, I've got to, I may have to underprice to get started. Am I going to keep doing it? For sure I'm going to keep doing it, because it is delivering very strong growth in my cash flows, and my shareholders love it. So they don't care that I'm only making 9.5% when the people who stay in the home market are making 12. They don't care about it at all. They're very happy for me to do it, and I'm going to keep on.